That's my ride home. Good. Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the City of Delray Beach Planning and Zoning Board for Monday, June 19th, 2023. Ms. Miller, would you please call the roll?
Ellen Zeller.
Here.
Julian Blankenship.
Here.
Joy Howell.
Here.
Gregory Snyder absent. Christina Morrison absent. Chris Brown absent. Chris Davey.
Here. Have my colleagues all had an opportunity to review the revised agenda?
Motion
Yes.
to approve the agenda as amended.
And second.
Motion by Ms. Blankenship, second by Ms. Howell. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll.
Ellen Zeller.
Yes.
Julian Blankenship.
Yes.
Joy Howell.
Yes.
Gregory Snyder absent. Christina Morrison absent. Chris Brown absent. Chris Davey.
Yes. And we can now move in. My colleagues all had the opportunity to review the minutes from the April 17th, 2023 meeting, and if there are no amendments, can we get a motion?
I wasn't here for it, so.
Motion to approve.
Mr. Zeller?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Ms. Blankenship, motion by Ms. Blankenship, second by Mr. Zeller. Ms. Miller, if you please call the roll.
Ellen Zeller.
Yes.
Julian Blankenship.
Yes.
Joy Howell.
Yes.
Gregory Snyder. Christina Morrison. Chris Brown absent. Chris Davey.
Yes. Let the record show the minutes for the April 17th, 2023 meeting were approved 4-0. I would now ask any member of the public who is here this evening who plans on testifying or speaking before the board on any issue tonight to please rise and be sworn by our board secretary.
Please raise your right hand. By the authority vested in me, the notary of the state of Florida, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 6. Is there any member of the public here this evening? This would be comments from the public on non-agenda items. This is the time where if someone wants to speak about an issue that is not on our agenda, you just want to speak about something in the city, you would come to the microphone now. Seeing no one rise, public comment will be closed. And we can then move on to item number 8A, and I can hand it to Ms. Dossery.
Could, before you get to that, if you could read the quasi-judicial
Oh,
rules.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it. I was remiss in reading these this evening. This hearing shall be conducted in accordance with the City of Delray Beach quasi-judicial rules. The applicant and the city shall be permitted to present their case. The public shall be allowed to speak for 3 minutes each, or a maximum of 6 minutes if the person represents an organization or a group of people who are present but agree not to speak. The board, members, staff, and the applicant may be allowed to cross-examine a witness. The city or the applicant will be allowed to offer rebuttal testimony. The decision to approve or deny an application or appeal may not legally be made upon personal views as to whether a project is a good project or not, nor may a decision be based on the number of citizens who support or oppose a particular project. The law requires that all decisions must be made on the basis of whether the project meets the requirements of law, the comprehensive plan, and the land development regulations. So, With that being said, we can move on to item number 8B as in Bravo, which is
Good evening, Grizel Rodriguez, Senior Planner. I'm introducing item 8B, 3 hearings, 2023-107, 2023-108, 2023-109 for 4594 133rd Road South.
Thank you.
While the applicant's making his way up here, could you just ask if there are any ex parte communications?
Thank you, Kelly. I'll turn to my colleagues and ask, has there been any ex parte communication on this item?
Not for me.
I visited the site once again.
Let the record show there was none by Ms. Howell, none by Ms. Blankenship, and Mr. Zeller visited the site, and I had none as well. Mr. Cavelli, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mike Cavelli, Cavelli Design, 1209 South Swinton Avenue. I have a bit of a request.
Sure.
We were handed an 11-page document as we walked in the door with objections to the project. And as you know, when you don't have an entire board, as you only have 4 people right now,
Yes.
one negative vote does not allow this to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So as I have not had time to review or prepare for any of this, I would request that we defer this till next month.
Okay. Yes, I was just going to ask Ms. Dassery how our schedule is for next month.
It's always, we never know this far in advance exactly how many items we'll have, but that is fine.
Okay, are you comfortable with the
Yes.
July, or do you want to, you're
July is
comfortable with
fine.
July?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So let's postpone this for a date certain. Our July meeting is what date?
Make
You
a
actually,
motion.
you don't have to do it to a date certain because of
No.
the new law that passed, so they'll actually have to do the mailings again for it, so.
They will, okay, they will have to.
But the
renotice.
applicant will pay that based on the
Okay.
request for
We'll take care
the,
of that.
Great.
Make a motion. Do I have to, should I make a motion?
yep, motion to continue to the,
Motion to continue item 8B, 4594 133rd Road South Annexation.
Second.
Let the record show, motion by Ms. Blankenship, second by Ms. Howell. Ms. Miller, if you could call the roll.
Ellen Zeller,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Joy Howell,
Yes.
Gregory Snyder, Christina Morrison, Chris Brown absent, Chris Davy.
Yes.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Gavelli, we'll see you next month.
Okay.
You beat the rain coming in, but I don't think you're going to beat the rain going out.
Moving forward, 8C.
This is very small.
Ms. Rodriguez, I just want to say, this is your first time, I believe, before the board, and I'm sorry it was so brief.
She's
Dress
not.
rehearsal.
Okay.
Okay, good evening. For the record, Rebecca Dossery. We're reading into the record file number 2022-124. And this may be familiar to some of you. This is one of the many corrective land use map amendments we've been trying to get through. This was previously heard as ordinance number 1622 in May of last year, but through some error, it did not actually make it onto a commission agenda. And so we, because of the time that passed, we needed to bring it back before you in order to follow the proper procedures.
just quickly, Rebecca, you guys probably don't have any on the corrective land use map amendment, but are there any ex parte communications related to this?
No.
No.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Honestly, it didn't even dawn on me on this item since it's put forth by the city.
Right.
Okay, so just really quickly, it's just under half an acre at the intersection of Northeast 3rd Avenue and Northeast 14th Street. It's an open space tract owned by the city. The map error designated it as low density, but it really should be open space because that's what it is and is intended to be. We have the brief history of the property. It's been open space at least since 1989, and it was in 2017 or 2016, 2017 when the transition was made between software systems. In 2016, as you can see, it was OS, and then it became LD just again, through an era of the mapping process. And this is how the existing and proposed map will change from the LD to the correct OS designation. And it meets all of the requirements, the required findings for consistency, concurrency, and compliance with the land development regulations. We did the direct notice mailer and the property notice sign on the property week before. And these are your options. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
I think I voted for this the first time. But I don't
It was a unanimous vote prior.
It was 7-0.
It was a 7-0 vote, yeah.
Okay. I'll turn to my colleagues. Does anybody have any comments on this item?
I go by this site all the time, and it's totally appropriate for open space.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, we're going to ask for public comment on this item if there's anybody here in the audience on it, but I can already tell by the way nobody's paying attention to this item. Everybody's looking at their phone or something else. Public comment in this item is closed since
Thank you.
nobody's rising. And I'll turn to my colleagues since I think the four of us were on the board and voted for this last year.
I'll make a motion if you want. Recommend approval to the City Commission on ordinance number 27-23, a city-initiated land use map amendment for the property located to the west of Dixie Highway and east of the intersection of Northeast 3rd Avenue and Northeast 14th Street from low-density residential, LD, to open space, OS, in correction of a data conversion error by finding that the amendment and the approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in land development regulations.
Let the record show motion by Ms. Howell, second by Ms. Blankenship. Ms. Miller?
Helen Zeller,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Joy Howell,
Yes.
Gregory Snyder, Christina Morrison, Chris Brown absent, Chris Davy.
Yes. Let the record show the item passed 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dossering. Moving right along. It could be.
Hi, good evening. My name is Michelle Hoyland. I'm Principal Planner of Historic Preservation Division within the Department of Development Services. And I'm here tonight to present item number 9A, which is file 2021-278 for the Atlantic Avenue Historic District. It's an LDR amendment via ordinance number 26-23. Okay. I've given quite lengthy presentations at other boards. Should there be something I don't cover tonight, you have questions, obviously I'm here for your questions. But I think some of you have watched the other board meetings. Feel free to watch June 7th, HPB, April 19th, I believe it was, also HPB. And then there was a presentation last year, July 19th, at the City Commission.
Your mic on?
It is. I feel like I'm not loud enough. I'll get closer. Thank you. So did you get all those dates, Mr. Zeller? Okay. They're also covered in the presentation. So we're going to go through a little bit of background first. But your item that's before you tonight is to provide a recommendation to the City Commission of ordinance number 26-23, which is to amend LDR section 4.5.1, the local register of historic places. It's actually subsection I, and the City of Delray Beach zoning map to reflect the historic designation of the Atlantic Avenue Historic District, which is generally located along East Atlantic Avenue from Swinton to the Intracoastal. So first, let's cover a tiny bit of background. In 2015, the City Commission created the Historic Preservation Task Force. This was a group of people brought together to look at ways to strengthen historic preservation within the city. That group met for nearly 2 years, had a long series of recommendations that included LDR amendments, which have been approved, addition of staff, creation of new historic districts. They presented to the City Commission in 2017, who accepted all of their recommendations, including the creation of 3 new historic districts: Frog Alley, North Swinton or Swinton Avenue, and Atlantic Avenue. When the Commission accepted those recommendations, they also moved on to add them as comprehensive plan policies. We're going to cover this a little bit further, but the findings that we're going to look at tonight talk about compliance with the comprehensive plan. So policy HPE 1.4.8 included creating a study analysis to identify if there is an area to qualify as a historic district along Atlantic Avenue. The city engaged Rich J. Heisenbottle Architects. He is a historic preservation architectural professional, revered all the way to the state and national level. He's out of Miami. He's worked with the city before. His analysis of the area extended from I-95 to A1A. That's what you see here. This is the report. This is attached to the ordinance in the backup for your item. And that report studied the avenue. Is there context, essentially, for a historic district along Atlantic Avenue? But the report includes his purpose, methodology, the history of the city and Atlantic. It's a really nice read. There's also Florida Master Site File forms. Those go along with each property, evaluating each individual property, along with maps and photographs. This is an excerpt from his report. This is the criteria for which a historic district is, or a site is looked at for eligibility. This is the general or the overall boundary of the proposed historic district. In this case, you can see it extends from the Intracoastal Waterway on the east or right side of the screen to Swinton Avenue on the west. Generally, it's the properties facing Atlantic Avenue. There are a couple around the corner on North Federals, but generally they're facing Atlantic. The consultant recommended creating a historic district. It qualifies for a local and a National Register historic district. The consultant and the board, Historic Preservation Board, have determined that the area has cultural and historical significance. This is the job of the Historic Preservation Board in this multi-part process. They are to look at whether or not the area qualifies. So what is a period of significance? This is the time period for which the buildings were constructed, original construction dates. There are 70 total properties that would be within this Atlantic Avenue Historic District. 44 are contributing, 26 are non-contributing. Contributing means they're historic, non-contributing means they're not, which could be that they're not yet, or there's some reason, alterations that could have affected their historical integrity. So the period of significance extends from 1903 to 1968. This is a zoomed-in version of the map we received from the consultant. Everything in yellow is a contributing property. Everything in blue is a non-contributor. You'll note there's some orange and green on the map. The orange is the existing Old School Square Historic District. The moniker, not to get confused with the Old School Square Historic Arts District zoning designation. The green on the east side or right side of your screen is the Marina Historic District. The proposed Atlantic Avenue Historic District will overlap these two historic districts. So those properties that have the green and orange underneath and you see they're yellow and blue, they're already within a district and considered contributing and non-contributing. And this is just for emphasis so that you can see the properties over on the east where the green is, they're zone CBD today with a historic district overlay. The properties on the left are zoned Old School Square Historic Arts District. This is attached in your backup, a version of this map. This is our existing zoning map today. This is what the overlay areas look like on our zoning map. They're a crosshatch diagonal. Marina on the right, Old School Square on the left. This is the proposed Marina Historic District Old School Square on the left with the Atlantic Avenue Historic District overlapping them. So you can see it really becomes a link in the chain between the two historic districts on the east and west. So as I've said, it applies to the properties generally facing Atlantic. The peripheral properties, the surrounding properties that are not included within this map area are not included within this proposed district and this effort. The Historic Preservation Ordinance that was created in 1989 and is found in Section 4.5.1 of the LDRs will continue to apply to the historic districts that are existing, and it will apply to the new historic district known as Atlantic Avenue. All individual zoning designations as they exist today, the CBD, OSHAD, and CF, or OSR, which occur in this area, will remain. There's no change to zoning regulations occurring. This is what the section in the code itself looks like. So this is found in 451. This is our local register of historic places. And so the proposal is to amend it to add number 46 as the Atlantic Avenue Historic District. This is another look of how it looks in our LDRs. You can see 1, 2, 3, and 6 on here are historic districts with their legal descriptions. West Settlers is also within this 45 item list. It's further down. This is the ordinance, copy of it here, so you see the legal description that would all be added to the LDRs. And now we're going to talk about compliance with the comprehensive plan. This is taken from the comprehensive plan vision statement. In an effort of saving time, because it looks like we're having a shorter meeting tonight, I won't read the whole thing. But ultimately, you'll see I've highlighted in blue is that there has been a proud celebration of our historic heritage in Delray Beach. We are an award-winning city with a number of awards bestowed upon us for things that both people within the organization of the city and people owning businesses and stakeholders have all contributed to this success. This is a view of Atlantic Avenue, which I wanted to take the after, but it's not done yet. It's almost done. Hands is on the left in this picture. You can see there's an old appliance store, which is now Lionfish. This is an older photograph of what our downtown looked like in the late, probably 60s, we're guessing, 60s in this time frame. And as we went into the 1980s, there was really an effort that was needed for revitalization. With the 1989 comprehensive plan, it was identified that through historic preservation, saving of Old School Square, which was slated for closure by the school district and possibly redeveloped with a bowling alley or a Kmart at the time, the city and the community really came together and decided we want to save our crown jewel in downtown, or make it a crown jewel, and do something to help our downtown. The downtown was not a place you would go in the evenings. It used to be, but it fell into disrepair. That revitalization was built on the back of historic preservation. And we've identified that within our comprehensive plan. This is not an opinion. This is something that's widely recognized and we have acknowledged. That preservation-based economic development, such as the idea of buying local, is a concept that we've built that success. So that's a lot of what the review that Historic Preservation Board has done. The historic preservation element is a new element to the comprehensive plan. When we adopted the Always Delray plan in the 2020, February of 2020, I believe it was. Before, the historic preservation principles were sprinkled throughout in different policies, and they've been brought together, but they still do exist in other elements. So the focus here is, one, the first policy was continuing to study possible areas for designation. You can see that with HPE policy 1.2.2. 1.2.3 is to continue to expand the inventory of historic properties through the preparation of master site file forms for documented and undocumented properties. And then 148 was conduct the survey report of Atlantic Avenue from 95 to Ocean Boulevard for the purpose of identifying a qualifying area where a historic district may be established through the designation process identified in the LDRs. This is a big focus on maintaining and increasing our historic building stock, our historic inventory, and our resources. That contributes to the longevity of our authenticity at the city. The economic prosperity element also covers topics relating to historic preservation, from things such as celebrating historic preservation efforts to adaptive reuse of structures, both in residential, commercial, and mixed-use areas. It also encourages preservation of our city's historic building inventory to brand that in marketing efforts. This is the neighborhood district and corridor element, which also identifies a policy relating to creating incentives for historic preservation that support adaptive reuse of structures. This is a sustainability principle. This is why we find it sprinkled throughout our historic or comprehensive plan. We're only going to be able to utilize our landfills for so much longer before we need another one. The greenest building is the oldest building. There's all kinds of research. I have many more slides that I've hidden in the presentation should you wish to touch on any topics. But again, the request before you is to look at making a recommendation to the City Commission about amending the city's LDRs to create this new historic district. These are the land development regulation guidelines, recommendations, regulations of how you make an amendment to the LDRs. It has to stop here at the Planning and Zoning Board before it continues on to City Commission. And then your findings is to find that the amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Of course, you also have to find consistent with 1.1.6A here, which is that we're making a stop here at the Planning and Zoning Board and doing it by the ordinance adoption procedures. So this request, where we've been so far is, like I mentioned earlier, July 19th, 2022, Commission said get moving staff, go study Atlantic Avenue to create a historic district. April 19th, HPB set the public hearing. They had that hearing June 7th, recommended unanimously approval of the ordinance to the City Commission. It made a stop at the DDA. By a 3-2 vote, it was denied. 2 board members were absent. Next will be first reading, likely July. I don't want to say the date just yet, but we have a target date for July. And then at the Commission, with second reading occurring in August. That completes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wyland. Should I now, Ms. Brandon, open it up to the public? We have in the past.
Right, it's up to the board, but I think because you have in the past, it's probably a good thing to go ahead and do so now as well.
I'd like to hear from the public.
That's my attitude as well. So at this time, if there's any member of the public who wishes to speak on this item, please come forward to the microphone on my left. Please state your name and address for the record. And if you have not been sworn, please tell me so that you can be sworn before you testify.
I have been sworn in.
Great, thank you.
My name is Steve Cohen. I live at 1140 Bohemia Road in Delray Beach. I've lived here since 1982. I have been working on developing the downtown for 35 years. Our town is the definition of successful revitalization from a blighted, dangerous city to a 3-time All-American city without once mentioning or using the name historic, because we are not historic by any measure. They're trying to manufacture a historic district here to the detriment of all our property owners who put in all our time and our money and our efforts, to all the merchants and people whose lives depend on the city. They have one expert that will testify that any building with 50-year-old bricks is contributory. That doesn't make it historic. It will cap the value going forward of all the property values on Atlantic Avenue. It will also provide a floor for those properties that might be more stable in bad times, but it will stop the values going forward. We are not a historic city. When you take a look at Savannah or Charleston or Philly or Boston, Charleston, take a look at it. It's the first golf club, the start of the Civil War, the first community college, the first playhouse. Savannah, the first planned city with streets and blocks, the cotton gin invented there. The world's cotton prices were set on the steps of the Savannah Cotton Exchange, and it's still standing. Philly, the Declaration of Independence, and the First and Second Continental Congress, and they ratified the Constitution, the Liberty Bell. These are really, truly historic towns. They're organic. They're trying to manufacture a historic district here by hiring some one person who says what they need. That's kind of suffering from confirmation bias. They're not looking at the contradictory studies that will give other statements that do not support this. We have several experts that we will bring in that will show these buildings are not contributory and the Ave is not historic. We have historic districts, the OSS, Old School Square, Sunday House, Cason Cottage. These are historic, true historic areas. And if people want to come here and see historic areas, they'll go there. They're not coming from around Indiana or the Northeast or the rest of the country as part of a historic tourism process to see Atlantic Avenue. But you will stifle all the growth, creativity, and eclectic storefronts that has made us come from that blighted area. She talked about adaptive reuse. No one has done more adaptive reuse in the city than I have. I don't mean that bragging, but I know what works. Over 100,000 square feet, over 30 years. And I know what the tenants want, I know what the merchants want, I know what the market wants, I know what'll work. Historic doesn't work on our Ave. We're not old and stale, we're new, we're fresh, we're vibrant, we're crisp. The history of Delray Beach is actually the history of change. If you pass this, you now are saying you're never changing again, you can no longer move forward, you can't adjust your storefronts for economic conditions, new technological developments, or to move with whatever might be needed.
Mr. Cohen, that's actually your time. I appreciate it.
It's also tough to argue 30 years in 3 minutes. Just having an open mind and look at the contrarian studies that have been done. They're not going to give them to you. We will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen.
Carolyn Patton, 1020 Tamarind Road, Delray Beach. I served on the task.
Ms. Patton, were you sworn?
No, I need to be.
If there's anybody else, if you just stand up and Diane
Yes.
can swear you in.
Please raise your right hand. By the authority vested in me, the notary of the state of Florida, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I served on the historic task force that made this recommendation. And back in 2018, the City Commission unanimously approved every recommendation that we made, and I'm so happy to have this come forward now. Since that time, it has been put in our comprehensive plan that we should create more districts in Delray Beach. That is in our comprehensive plan to support historic districts. And there is a lot of history. Charleston and Savannah have their history. Florida has its history. Every school child in Florida is taught Florida history. Now, this does not affect property rights. It is not going to affect the zoning on these buildings that exists now. And it is going to add benefits to people like Steve Cohen, who I have a lot of respect for, but we disagree on this, obviously. You can freeze your taxes before you do a renovation at that level, and they will not be raised, you will not be reassessed for 10 years. The people who bought my mother's house saved $100,000 on their taxes. So this is a major savings. There is also a streamlining of the permit process. Michelle has told us that they're streamlining it there, but also you don't have to go to planning and zoning, and you all, no offense, but You go straight to the Preservation Board, so you're streamlining your permitting, you're gaining money in that regard. And studies show throughout the country, and I can bring them in too, I'll bring them in too, show that properties raise in a historic district immediately because you are valuing it, you're keeping things the way people want it to be. So I urge you to vote yes on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patton.
Age before you. First, congratulations to the brave and dedicated for being here through this storm. Claudia Willis, 42 Palm Square. I really would like to address Mr. Cohen's comments, but I don't have the time because I have too many other things to say. But for sure, our Delray is historic. There are a lot of people that fear more regulations and more oversight, but really all we're doing is changing the board that's reviewing the proposals. And this board can do waivers. It can do waivers on setbacks. It can do FEMA flood requirement waivers. No other area can do that except for the historic district. So I believe that our downtown Delray actually needs to be a historic district to be more flexible. Each property, of course, is reviewed on its own merit, but the current buildings have relatively little or no parking. They're built lot line to lot line, and any changes to their configuration would trigger current parking requirements. So they need these waivers. In addition to the waivers that are already inherent in the historic rules, regulations, the city is trying to end in lieu parking. However, our staff is fighting to keep in lieu parking for the historic district. So that is also another reason that they need to be a historic district. Roger Cove is here tonight. I hoped Gary would be here, Iliopolis, because they both are architects that have worked in many historic districts and gotten many, many waivers to complete their proposals and move forward. I think you really can't say that the block across from Old School Square, which has been in a historic district since the 80s, has been held back by being in a historic district. Elizabeth's, the tin roof and whatever the new Old Bull Bar is, they have not been held back. They've been very successful, and boy, have their property values gone up since the 80s. Many of the processes in the historic district can be administratively approved, such as re-roofing, repainting, as long as you're not changing original materials. HPB does not rule on the interior. HPB does not review landscape plans. So there is a more fear of what HPB.
I just wanted, if you could start wrapping it up, Ms. Willis.
Okay,
I'm sorry,
all right, I'll wrap it up. I won't go back into all how compatible doesn't mean identical, et cetera, but I do want to do a cry out for some discussion and referring to commission the national designation along with the local. The local carries the regulation. There's no additional regulation with national, but you have a great benefit of tax breaks for investors. So please do give that some consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Willis.
Hello, Chair and Planning and Zoning Board. Roger Cope, for the record, Roger Cope, historic preservation architect. My office is actually in a historic property in the National Marina Historic District at 701 Southeast 1st Street, and I was actually noticed for this resolution. I hope you give this resolution an incredible amount of backing. Please give it serious consideration. It would continue to vitalize the downtown, the corridor, and its surroundings. And as Claudia very smartly said to you, a property there today, if it's going in for an improvement package, is going to have to go before SPRAB. I happen to have been the chairman of SPRAB for, I think, 3 terms, so I know what that entire process is. But if this resolution is adopted, and I hope it is, they won't go before SPRAB. They'll go before HPB. It's they're still going to be held to an incredibly high degree of design requirements and expectations. City of Delray, we're so lucky, we're so rich with guys like Gary Eliopoulos and the other architects in town that have dedicated their entire professional careers to make this city a historically important city. So I think this is another step in that direction. It's going to help revitalize a lot of things. And the last thing I'll leave you with, and I don't want to even take up my 3 minutes, but the developers that are most directly affected, maybe there can be some new historic preservation incentives that are a little bit outside the box that help counter the rights that they feel they may be losing if it were an HPB review. For example, the Department of the Secretary of Interior Standards says or allows for an existing historic structure to be added on to be supplemented, to be expanded. And you don't necessarily have to do it in a historic architectural way. It could be a super ultra modern way, and granted, it hasn't been done yet in Delray, but it doesn't. The Secretary of the Interior Standards don't limit a property owner from improving his property any more than the Planning and Zoning Division that oversees SPRAB would. They still have to abide by so many important things, and so I think you guys are in a great spot. Please don't discount this resolution. Get behind it. Let our city council get behind it, and the city as a whole will benefit immensely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cope. Yes, ma'am. Were you sworn?
I was.
Great.
My name is Cynthia Miller. I'm from Sweet Apple Broker in Varkas, 4800 North Federal Highway, Suite D306 in Boca. I represent 300 East Atlantic Avenue, who owns Blue Gallery. I would like to provide you with correspondence that we previously had forwarded to the city, which encloses an architectural report from Mr. Jose Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez has reviewed the proposal and the associated historic resources survey, and he is in opposition to this particular property being designated as masonry, vernacular, and contributing. We're therefore requesting a hearing on any such designation of that property, which would restrict the associated zoning regulations. We're also opposed to the ordinance as a whole. And we find that it's be overly broad because it doesn't particularly identify those properties which are genuinely historic. It's also illegal and contrary to the city's continuous prior determinations where this area has been determined to be part of a slum and blighted redevelopment district. Under Florida Statute 163, in 1985, the city adopted Ordinance 32-85. So that created the Community Redevelopment Agency, and it also determined the area under consideration right now to be slum and blighted area. So the city subsequently encouraged people to come purchase and invest in this redevelopment area. So come, purchase, invest. And then what we're going to do with these district properties is we're going to keep the tax increment monies and allow redevelopment to the fullest potential of the zoning laws. This led to investors pouring millions of dollars into Delray Beach. So into the city, there was these wonderful, improvements which have happened over the years. However, now you're seeking to alter and limit the property rights of these investors within this redevelopment district. And this is through a broad stroke historic designation, which is in direct contravention to the city's prior covenants with these same investors who came in and did these improvements. So it's important to realize that it was the CRA, not the Historic Preservation Board, which resulted in the designation of Delray as this all-American city, as your village by the sea, which is wonderful terms, and they're things to be proud of. However, you induced these investors to fund this reinvention from slum and blighted to where we are now. And now you're seeking to strip them of the use of these fullest extent of these zoning laws and the associated property rights, which were a central component that brought them here in the first place. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And if I don't know when it's appropriate, if I could give each one of you a copy of that letter just so you have it.
You can hand that to the board secretary, and she will be glad to distribute it for you.
And I have copies for them as well.
Pardon me. She's more than welcome to provide it to you, but I think we already have. This is the letter. It says Gonzalez at the top.
Yes.
Yes. We emailed that over. I just wanted to make sure you had that for your consideration.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, good evening.
You were sworn?
Yes, I was.
Okay, great.
And thank you for all that you do. Rita Rana, 50 East Road. I think we can do even better as a city in coming together and finding profitable and beneficial solutions for both sides. I understand Mr. Cohen's and Ms. Miller's concerns, but I disagree with both of them in one element with respect to the historic designation. I think people downplay how impactful the historic pockets of peace when you walk by Old School Square are. I think you misunderstand the subconscious feeling that people feel that they're part of like a hometown. Something reminds them of their childhood. I think that's a big reason why a lot of people move here and invest here. I also understand property rights, and I also fully support people trying to, we're a capitalist country, and I want people like Mr. Cohen and like Ms. Miller's owners to be able to be as profitable as possible. And I think there has to be a way that we can come together. I know I spoke with some people who are really supporting this designation, that there was some successful properties that did get this accomplished in coupling the historic designation with the development, profitability. And that's really my ask, is that we all stretch ourselves just a little bit more in understanding each side's and the positive impact of each side to make this city the best that it can be. I do think that village by the sea is alluring, and I think building square places with big windows that don't really have a lot of character diminishes that. There's got to be a way that these people can make the kind of money that they're looking to make and also keep some sort of the differential that we have here. And that's my ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rana.
I'm sorry, what was her last name?
Rana?
Ron?
I believe Rita Rana.
Thank you.
Great. Seeing no one else rising to speak, public comment is closed on this item. And I would now turn to my colleagues and please, anybody has any questions of staff?
I think that to make it a historic district is not the work of this board. I think that's the city commission decision to make, but I do have some questions as it relates to me being a planning and zoning board member. But I think that it's my duty to make sure that we're putting this in the code in the right way, and I understand. I have communicated with Anthea, the city staff, and the city attorney's office with several questions about this, and so I'll just go ahead and start.
Can you speak a little louder, please?
I'll just go ahead and start. I'm sorry. The first thing I just want to clarify that I did not hear, and I might have missed Ms. Hoyland speaking about it, but this is not a traditional district creation. It's an overlay. Is this correct?
Yes, this is an overlay, which is found in section 4.5 of the code.
Can you tell me the difference between a district and an overlay for the record, especially for myself and anyone who's watching?
So I think you're using the word district and overlay they're synonymous.
No, they're not. There's just a traditional zoning district, and then there's an overlay that sits over top of the zoning district. So the CBD zoning will not change, but there will be a historic overlay on top of it.
Hang on, let me answer. The city's local register of historic places, which is section 4.5.1I, which is here on the screen, is found within the overlay section of the code.
I understand. Could I just have a basic, Miss Brandon, can you just give me a basic definition of what an overlay is? And I'm asking Miss Brandon, please. Thank you.
So I think the difference that, I think we've communicated in the emails is there's an overlay as a zoning district, and there's an overlay that we're presenting it as in the zoning map, that we're showing that there's an overlay of a historic district. So when she's saying they're synonymous, we're basically just presenting it on the map to let everyone know, hey, you're in a historic district if you're living in this area.
Okay.
So it's not an overlay like a zoning district overlay.
So, I don't know if I'm sorry. I don't mean to contradict you, Ms. Brandon, but if there's a base CBD zoning that will not change, that is the base zoning, and we're overlaying a historic district or historic designation or whatever you want to call it over top of that, there is, you're telling me that there'll be no historic, what does that mean? Because I know we've seen in OSHAD with the CBD overlay that it does mean something, that there's an extra layer that gets added onto it. And so I would like Anthea, please answer.
Okay. So the reason that we're saying they're synonymous, we meant with historic district versus historic overlay.
Okay.
Those are that's the synonymous thing that Ms. Hoyland was referring to. 451 contains those historic overlays, whether it's an individual designation or a district. In this case, we're bringing a district forward to you.
Right.
And the reason we're making that distinction is we actually do have zoning overlays, medical arts overlays, other overlays that change the uses you can do on a building or in a property, excuse me, it's theoretically in a building. So in this case, and we're trying to be careful with that because part of OSHAD, which is a zoning district, which sounds really similar to the name of the historic district, is a zoning district designation.
Yes.
And there's an overlay on that for using CBD uses and some development standards. It's customized, right? So I'm sorry I kept talking and I lost track of what you asked me. Did you ask me
That's
again?
okay. So we have CBD as the base zoning.
Right.
And we're going to overlay
so what is the difference? Okay.
What is the difference? And then what is the impacts on the CBD?
Okay. So it is a level, I would explain it, and I'm going to defer to Michelle if I don't get it all right, okay, that it's a level of refinement related to the specific architectural qualities of the building. Because right now, if you are in the central business district, some stuff is absolutely the same. The uses you're allowed, what is your parking requirement, how many street trees do you have to plant if you build something, all of that follows straight CBD. Where it gets a level of refinement is that CBD has 7 architectural standards. Actually, 5, and then the 2 that now require commission. They're very broad. In fact, the opening to the guidelines book tells you these are purposely broad. So Mediterranean Revival could be its very sober mission cousin, or it could be a very ornate Meisner-esque building, and they're all kind of captured by that very broadly defined style. When it comes to historic preservation, the architecture has been refined to its period of significance. Michelle has a slide that will show you all of the ones that are in there. And so all of those fit into those 7. And then there are the Secretary of the interior standards that would apply in addition to the elevation ones that apply right now in 4618 or 16. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the thing. So the standards are more customized to the type of architecture, but the board, and so the board that's charged with that is Historic Preservation, not SPRAB. So you have design guidelines before, you have them now. You had to go to a board to change anything, which is a little different than our single family districts that go straight to permit unless they're designated, right? But now we're talking about CBD. CBD always had to go to SPRAB. Instead of SPRAB, it's going to HPB. HPB can issue variances and waivers, so they're not going to send you off to Board of Adjustment for a setback waiver because they have the power to take those things into account. Other regulations are flat out exempted. We just passed a green building ordinance that requires certification of certain structures. Historic properties are exempt. They will not have to do that. So it changes a couple rules.
A couple of rules, but if it's zone CBD, and I know I'm not trying to belabor the point, but as, in my mind, from what I have sat on this board for quite some time and I have seen a lot of things come through, and when there's an overlay that there are additional regulations or more strict regulations that need to be, I don't want to say strict, I'll say different regulations that are also considered when an application comes through. And so let's say I'm a property owner in the CBD and I want to do improvements to the front facade of my building. At that point, because if there is a historic overlay on top of the district, then I also need to meet the requirements of historic preservation LDRs. Is this correct?
The Secretary Michelle has handled Tin Roof and all the others that have come through.
Of course.
Yeah, let me let her give you that.
Okay, so yes, within section 4.5.1, there are regulations for visual compatibility. There's also ensured compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic preservation rehabilitation. There's also compliance with Delray Beach Historic Preservation Design Guidelines. So while the majority of this area is zoned CBD, and you're correct in saying that, there are some areas that are zoned OSHAD, that will not change, and OSR. They comply with their zoning district regulations, which we're working with properties that are in this case already. Down in Marina, where they're already zoned CBD, they comply with the CBD standards and the Secretary of the Interior standards.
Okay,
and
that's
it's
all.
predominantly.
That's all. I just wanted to put that on the record. That's what it is. It's not just we're going to put this as in the local register of historic places, and then the properties will be unaffected when they go for any kind of improvements or whatnot. Because that's just not true.
Well, I just want to be clear in something where I understand what you're saying. There is a different set of visual compatibility standards that are applied. CBD already has.
I understand that, but then there's...
May I finish? Just please. I want to get it on the record. This is not changing zoning or use.
I understand that. I think that what I'm asking...
I know you do.
...is the layer that is going over that will create additional requirements if for the CBD as far as improvements, demolitions, anything that goes like...
You're correct. Yes.
And they will also have the historic
It's important to make sure
guidelines.
people understand that you're 100% correct. I just wanted to be clear that we weren't somehow
we're not changing land use, we're not changing the zoning.
Use or allowable permitted conditional uses. Those all remain the same, which is the context. And as we move through this process further onto City Commission, we're likely going to be addressing in further detail with professionals to speak about what is permitted on a national level.
I'm not worried about national. I don't want the city to come across as being disingenuous about what is going on.
No, I agree.
Because we have a base, we understand there's a base zoning, there's a land use designation that is not changing. But there is a change that is occurring here. It's just not putting a group into the local register of historic places, and that's all it is, because it is a change. If it's CBD, if it's OSHAD, if it's OSR, if it's community facilities, it is what it is. But there is another layer that's being put on top. I have other questions, so I don't want to belabor that point.
Okay.
Ad valorem tax exemption that I saw on there. the DDA is funded by ad valorem tax. And so although it won't change what they receive on the property as it stands, if there is any sort of improvements, then I would assume that the tax exemption would make the DDA not receive extra money. Is the DDA exempt from that because they are a special taxing district? You don't have to answer the question. I just wanted to put it out there because I think that it's important that we look at it holistically, a bigger picture, that we don't want to be handcuffing the DDA in their work. And I don't know if it affects them, if they're exempt or not, but just wanted to put that on the record.
Yeah,
I'm
honestly not positive of that, but if
the DDA covers 75% or more of our historic districts now, and that it'll be something we'll look into. I don't have an answer, but I think it's a really great question.
To just put that out there because I wasn't sure. I just had
definitely
the thought.
look into it for you.
But I can say, if I can clarify, Ms. Blankenship, that with historic ad valorem tax exemption, it is the change in value that occurs as a result of an addition or improvement that increases the ad valorem. So if your ad valorem taxes were based on 100,000, you add on 1,500 square feet, and now it's based on 200,000. The break is on that increase only, not the base.
I just didn't know if the DDA, as an ad valorem, if they were exempt or not, because I'm not sure. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
And I just want to make sure. Now, like I said, it's the commission decision whether they want to make this an historic district. But I just want to make sure that this is not being put forward as a stopgap for further development, or it's like some sort of backdoor down zoning or something like that we're trying to inhibit. And I say that because in the CBD and the purpose statement in the LDRs, it says the intent of the Central Business District is established to preserve and protect the cultural and historic aspects of downtown Delray and simultaneously provide for the stimulation and enhancement of the vitality and economic growth of this special area. So I feel like that the LDRs in themselves is what creates the district, keeps it small, keeps it looking historic in the way it has been. That's why we have the LDRs. That's why we have amended them, and the height and the density is regulated in the CBD in very specific ways. Especially, I think that's the lowest in height you can have in the city is in the CBD, and it's in the intent and purpose statement that the reason for even creating the Central Business District was to protect cultural and historic aspects of downtown Delray. So I'm just saying that we have code in place that is really supposed to be protecting, and I just want to make sure that this is being put forward in a good spirit, and that we're not trying to do a stopgap, against development. And then since vested rights were discussed, I'm just going to ask this, Ms. Brandon. I know that I had sent an email about it. As far as property rights go and vested rights and regulatory takings, I'm not saying that this elevates to that level, but there certainly is a discussion to be had about a reasonable reliance on the building code in place and vested rights of property owners. And I just didn't know if you had something to say about that, and I know that the city has the right to put in a historic district and the police power for that, but I'm just,
Right, I think it's not a zoning change. I think there are going to be some changes that affect the property, for sure. But there aren't, on its face, there aren't substantial changes that I can see that would relate to what you're discussing about vested property rights. The height's going to remain the same. A lot of this, I believe most of the setbacks are remaining the same. Those kind of things that you can see from their face that maybe would cause an issue like that are not in existence for this.
Okay, thank you. And then let me make sure that I said everything that I wanted to. And I guess that's it. I just wanted to make sure that, the way that it's being proposed. Oh, one more thing I wanted to add, and I believe I had CC'd Anthea into this conversation, was that when the code is vague, sometimes there's a lot of questions. It becomes problematic when the code is vague and it's not explicit. And so I am concerned that it's just being dropped into the local register of historic places, but it's not really explained well in the code about what it means. And I even asked about a regulating plan, but I was told by the attorney's office it's not really necessary. But when the OSHAD has a CBD overlay, it's very clear in the code what that means. Very clear. And then, hang on, and then you can answer my whole question together. Okay. And then, and I understand that you don't need that as a regulating plan, but also in the section that we were referring to, LDR 4.5.1, there is a notes section that if you go and look, I don't think you can look at it, but I'll just tell you really quickly if I can find it. There's a notes section that has that explains some of the, let me see if I can find it. Yes, the notes section discusses all development on properties in the OSHAD district, which are subject to CBD regulations and overlays. I mean, it's very clear in that section about OSHAD and CBD overlay.
But that's not a historic district. The CBD overlay is actually a zoning district that changes the uses and the development that's allowed to happen on that OSHAD underlying zoning. So it's not, but it's OSHAD zoning district that has a CBD overlay that allows some of the uses. So they're not the same. It's not the district that has a CBD overlay. It's the zoning designation that has a CBD zoning overlay. Marina is not shown on the regulating plan because it's not the district that's shown. It's just CBD. There's no change to the regulations that are occurring through a zoning overlay. And that's what's getting a little confusing, right? Because everything's called CBD, Old School Square, whatever. The way that the overlay is shown on the zoning map is that regulating plan. It is the map that shows, hey, your property is in a district. Whether it's zone CF or RM or CBD, it's in a district. That's what that overlay means. The CBD overlay actually applies additional uses to property that is otherwise zoned Old School Square. That, for example, has a regulation in it that the buildings are supposed to be like 60 feet wide. Unless you're in CBD overlay, where we understand that part of OSHAD is going to take a more Main Street form, and therefore it shifts you to using CBD setbacks, frontage, things like that. But the uses are limited. They don't give you all of CBD uses there. Okay. So that's the distinction.
Thank you. And were the property owners, I read the survey, and I did not see where the property owners were contacted by the survey. The people who conducted the survey, were they at any point in time brought to the table to have a conversation, or were they notified that the city was going to be looking into making their, potentially putting their property in the local register of historic places?
So all folks that are within a 500-foot radius of the proposed historic district and all properties within the proposed historic district received notice prior to the June 7th Historic Preservation Board meeting. There was not a requirement by the consultant to go and meet with person to person of every property that was studied, remembering that they studied everything from 95 to A1A.
I understand, but did the city initiate
no,
any
ma'am,
conversation
they did
or
not.
outreach for the property owners
That's
that
the
are going to be
city.
affected by the...
That was our responsibility with the public outreach effort that we've done, and that's what this is.
Well, no, this is not the public outreach effort. That,
No,
in my opinion, that would have come way before now.
I don't want to, I don't know why, but I really don't want this to seem argumentative, and I'm trying very hard to provide clear facts and information. There have been a number of workshops that have occurred prior to this at the city commission level that have been noticed publicly. There has been the Historic Preservation Board discussions that have occurred.
I understand the legal,
And I also
required to do, but I'm asking you.
The consultant did not.
Ms. Hoyland, please. Did anyone reach out to any property
No,
owner
ma'am.
that's going to be affected and then have a conversation at any point that their property is being considered to be included in a historic district?
We sent a public notice prior to the June 7th Historic Preservation Board meeting.
Okay, when was
it
the
was
survey?
1,000
I'm not
people.
the survey was done in December of 2021? That was when it was handed to the city?
The survey has been a developing document, but ultimately it was something that was completed at the end of 2021, complicated by the COVID effort.
I get that, but if it's my property and the city's going to do something that affects my property, I want them to reach out to me and have a conversation that this could be happening.
Well, I mean, let's let's just look at something
I'm done.
first. Fine, but
Thank
let me just say that the city doesn't reach out. We're changing uses on properties frequently, even due to scrivener's errors.
You don't think
We
this is
are
a big
now.
deal? Putting a historic district on top of our CBD? I think it's one of the biggest
What
things
I'm
that's
gonna-
happened in the
But
city.
let me ask you something. Haven't the property owners all been noticed? And in addition to the fact
When
that
it was
property
going rather
owners...
for to the Historic Preservation Board, but their thoughts weren't included. Now, I know that there is relief in the code. I don't know if I read it correctly, but they can, if this goes through, then a property owner does not want to be included, they can petition the city?
No, I don't believe that that's accurate. I think that that's been the past practice here, and I think it's akin to adopting alternative facts. You either have a project or a building that is architecturally significant or it's not. That said, that is your director's point of view. Your commission may think differently. However, this has been in our comprehensive plan that had extensive public outreach. This was directed in a public meeting by the commission. The commission received a presentation of this document, then directed us to move forward. HPB received a public presentation of the document prior to setting the hearing. That sent out how many? 900 and almost 1,000 mailers. So we're glad that we've gotten a few people that have responded to that and are aware. And this process takes time. So it did go to HPB with those mailers. These folks are following the process along because they're aware of it and they're interested. It's still 2 more months before it makes it to City Commission. This is the process for public outreach.
Yeah, I mean...
Can I make some?
Can I?
That you had that said it started in 2015 or 2017.
Okay.
Excuse me,
Mr.
one
Zeller,
second.
I don't think your
Excuse me.
microphone
Hang
is
on
on.
one second.
Mr. Zeller, is your microphone?
Can we, hold on, please.
Sorry.
Ms. Blankenship, are you done?
Yes, I am. Thank
You're
you.
done. Mr. Zeller, your
I just have-
microphone on?
I have one quick question.
Please,
You
just
showed
make
the
sure your
slide.
microphone.
So it's our very beginning, and I know I cover a lot of ground, and perhaps I didn't need to present all of this, but I wanted the board to understand how this came to be that we are talking about creation of historic district, not that it's on staff's whim. In 2015, what began was the city commission asking a group of people to come together to look for ways to strengthen historic preservation. So that was between the 2015 and 17 timeframe was where the idea came, create a district. The actual study of the district didn't begin until about mid to late 2020.
So I just want to say, in 2015, I lived in the Marina Historic District. We got notice in one form or fashion that this task force was being created. We were in the historic district. Then you show that this task force made the recommendations. I wasn't on that task force, but I was aware that they were making recommendations. So to answer your question, there has been an ongoing process that if somebody wanted to find out about it, they would be able to have
Yes, sir.
learned about it.
And it was put in our comprehensive plan to begin the
Yes,
study.
and it was in the comprehensive plan.
Yes.
So might I just take the floor and say that I think the historic resource survey that was done by the Heisenbottle firm was an excellent report. I think Ms. Sure. Here we go. Okay, so I think that the Atlantic Avenue Historic Resource Survey that was done by Mr. Heisenbottle's firm, if I pronounce it correctly, was an excellent report. It covered all the bases going far back as the early foundings of the city, as was included in some of the pictures here. I read that report. I read Ms. Hoyland's staff report. I think she did an excellent job as well, explaining the purpose of it. When I was in law school, I lived in Boston, in Beacon Hill in Boston, which was a historic district in Boston. You learn a lot about history just by living in an area that is a historic district. After that, I moved to Philadelphia and lived in Philadelphia, and you can't miss the significance of historic districts in Philadelphia. Even if you wanted to, you can't miss the importance of history. And a good part of that area, when I moved there in the early 70s, was fairly run down. Now it was revitalized and redeveloped and is a prominent section in Philadelphia. From there, I moved to a little town in New Jersey, across from Philadelphia, called Haddonfield, New Jersey. That town was so historic that it was over the top. I mean, there were plenty of houses that and properties that were built before the Revolutionary War even started. It had like a little museum where the soldiers came through, the British soldiers came through, and then the United States soldiers came through, and they maintained that historic district. And when I first moved there, I have to admit that I thought it was a little excessive. And then I came to learn more about the significance of that. And from there, I moved to the Marina Historic District. Not even knowing necessarily that it was historic. I didn't move into a historic house. I moved into a new townhouse that was built there. But I soon learned the significance of the benefits of the history of the area. And historic preservation can and does increase the integrity of the areas and increase the property values of the town. I disagree with what Mr. Cohn was saying, that the property values will not increase. History will show that they do in fact increase. If you maintain the historical significance of your town, it's one of the most critical things that can happen for a town and the viability of a town, including the downtown sections of a small city such as Delray Beach. So, in my view, this is critical. This is critical to the ongoing history of Delray Beach. Doesn't matter that they tag on any building that's 50 years or older is eligible. It's important that they do that. It's important to the growth and the vitality of the town. I remember, I guess it was like in the late 70s, my parents moved to Boynton Beach, and when I would come and visit, my mother would say, well, if I told her I was going to go to the beach, she'd say, well, don't stay too long and come back early and be careful if you're driving through Delray. And I never got that sense. And when I got the opportunity to buy my house, as I said, in 2003 in the Marina Historic District, it was a revelation that that district even existed in Delray. And the property values in that area have increased. The property values of a lot of the historical buildings have increased. If that's your reason for opposing this, a fear of property values not increasing, the only way property value would not increase in a historic building is if you let it deteriorate, become dilapidated, and needs to be torn down. If you maintain your history, you will survive, you will thrive, and the entire city will benefit from it. So all in all, I'm in favor of this recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Zeller. Ms. Howell?
Yeah, I was on the Comprehensive Plan Task Force, which I believe you were also, Mr. Chairman. And so this issue is not a new issue. It's been around. We were discussing it in 2018, 19, 20 when the comp plan update was adopted, as you've laid out in your staff report. I guess I think it is I think it's a natural continuation of our revitalization of Atlantic Avenue. But I'd love to hear a little bit more on the economic benefits to owners. I mean, if I understood it correctly, you were saying that, a member of the public, I think, said that if an owner decides to update, renovate, et cetera, that they would then have 10 years of not having a stepped-up property tax basis. Is that right?
That was Miss Carolyn Patton, I think, that brought that issue to light, and that's true. So these were topics we covered pretty heavily with the Historic Preservation Board, but I am just going to show you a couple hidden slides because you've asked.
Well, the reason, let me just say one thing. The hesitation I'm hearing, I think, is revolving around a negative impact on business owners who want to make changes to their property. So I'd love to have a little more clarification and a little more in-depth on that, if you could, about
Absolutely.
the economic benefits.
Yep. So here we have a slide. This is from Mr. Heisenbottle's report on the district, and I'm going to cover in a little more depth what we do locally. So properties that are in local historic districts can qualify for the ad valorem tax exemption program. That is a program that is generated, identified, and the rules regulated on it at the Florida statute level. And then cities and counties can adopt historic districts and utilize the ability to have tax exemptions. What is an ad valorem? You have 1,000 square foot house, commercial building, whatever it might be. You add on to that building and your ad valorem taxes, city and county, increase, right? The assessor comes out, you have a CO, the property appraiser comes and looks and says, oh, your property is now worth double. That increased value, you do not pay taxes on for a 10-year period of time, and it's transferable from one owner to the next, so the owner can sell the property. There are also federal tax credits only for income producing properties. That can be even as a person with a single family home that they rent, that they don't reside in. And if they make improvements, this would require us to be a national district listing, which is typically more of an honorary district. The regulations are tied to the local. But if we sought national district listing, and say a commercial property owner wanted to improve their building, add on, renovate, change out windows, whatever it might be, the program provides for a 20% income tax deduction. It's spread out over 5 years. All of the changes that you've made have to be maintained in that 5 years, but once the 5 years is over, you can continue on with more changes. This program is probably most commonly used as we have seen. We've gone to conferences, we've seen the examples. The state has provided training and education for communities use it. But this is something you probably see more often used within a more metropolitan, larger city, because developers had figured out that you can combine these tax credits with like housing tax credits and other federal tax credits. We are encouraging the Old School Square Historic District owners and the Marina Historic District owners, and every meeting we have with redevelopment, go look at the program and use it. Here's the contact for the state. Here's the info on our city website. So that program exists. These are some of the other things that we do as a state historic preservation officer, which we are designated as for the city of Delray Beach. Should somebody come in with federal dollars that they're spending to improve roadways, cell towers, any kind of federal dollar project, that has to be in compliance with the structure. I'm not going to say specifically what structure, but we have a historic building in our downtown where a cell phone provider came through and wanted to put cell towers right in front of the building. And because we had the opportunity to review that, the cell towers were moved around the corner so as to not impact, have a negative impact on the facade of that building. It would have been complicated, but aside from even spatial, right, just the view shed. So we get to have a say or help our owners in that way. So it's a mitigation. The other thing I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on next here on my hidden slides over here is if you have an existing structure and you're coming through to do upgrades to that building, rehabilitation, interior build-outs, that's what's happening in our downtown. The downtown really hasn't changed much, the face of Atlantic Avenue. You do not have to comply with the energy code. The Florida Building Code has exemptions, as does ADA code, which can be very complicated for owners to have to comply with some of these requirements, maybe relating to elevators for locations of elevators, ramps. Not that they wouldn't want to provide accessibility, but there's some flexibility built into these exemptions. And if I can back up here, we've talked about property tax exemption. There's low interest loans that exist at a federal and state level for people who are doing improvements to properties of a certain age within a protected historic district. There's grants from the federal government, the state government. This municipality has some grants that are generally handled through the CRA, specifically for historic properties. The CRA happens to be a great partner to historic preservation, as well as private advocacy groups. The waivers and variances that the HPB can approve, this is an incentive. We have to talk about it. If you're in the CBD or you're in open space recreation or these zoning districts where you might have to make a stop at BOA and then move on to SPRAB as the process exists today, the process will be modified to be streamlined. As one of the members of the public said, you'll go straight to HPB. They have the approval authority to grant waivers and variances. Some CBD requirements still have a stop at CBD or at commission, which I think the commission ultimately doesn't want that to change for any board. FEMA flood variances, that can be very difficult for somebody who doesn't want to demolish a building, they just want to add on, but FEMA might be saying, you got to lift the whole building. You can get a variance. There's an exemption for that that's built into the FEMA code and allows us as a municipality to approve those variances. The exemption from compliance with the Green Building Ordinance, that's another incentive. That's something this board just recently saw and approved. Again, Carl Elefante was the one who said the greenest building is the one that already exists, because historic preservation is a sustainable practice, preserving the bricks and the wood that was harvested or created many years ago rather than sending them to a landfill. Nonconformities such as lack of parking, I think someone here on the board brought this up, or maybe it's a floor area ratio or a density issue. Those things can continue to exist even if you add on. So if you're not in a historic district and you start modifying your structure, now you've got to bring that structure up to code. So you don't have full vesting with properties that aren't within historic districts. And I do want to at some point just touch on the fact that, remember, the moniker is that this would be called the Atlantic Avenue Historic District, with CBD zoning, OSHAD zoning even, and OSR. The Old School Square Historic Arts District is a zoning name, and the Old School Square Historic District is the name of the overlay of the historic district. So that it's very confusing. We have to often educate our property owners on this, that they are two separate monikers and how that overlay triggers for review with properties that are over in OSHAD. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That was helpful.
Anything else? No.
Anthea just reminded me of something that I think would be helpful to show. And I have so much information on the economics of historic preservation. We've covered this in a lot of meetings. I'm sorry, I was thinking we were coming through for an LDR amendment. I didn't know that you may want to talk about this, but they're here. We can touch on this if you want, but I want to show you this. I have a few slides here which show buildings on the left. I've got lots of pictures around Delray, where we didn't even look that good, what you see on the left, that have gone through these buildings through some revitalization. So changes have occurred. You can see this building has new windows. It has new awning on the front, signage. Some of the base windows have changed as well in the storefront configuration. There's also an opening on the side that's been brought
Closed.
back.
Yeah.
Yep. At one point in time, the pineapple existed on this building. You can have murals in historic districts. They just have to go to the Historic Preservation Board for review. These are two other really great examples. So the one on the left was the Green Owl. It's now the Capital One Pete's Coffee location. And the one on the right is probably one of our most famed historic properties, designed by Samuel Ogren, was formerly known or originally known as the Arcade Tap Room. It's now the Wine Bar. So both of these properties are outside of the historic district, but they both qualify for historic designation. And when they started coming through, as any of our staff will note, when I see a property that's qualifying and it's possible it might be historic, can I take a look at it, right, and give some feedback to owners? These owners did a lovely job renovating the exterior, doing new windows, doing freshening, painting, changing detailing around their arch in the front. All of these changes would continue to qualify them for historic consideration. So they didn't disqualify themselves through the renovation process that they did. The doors on the Arcade Tap Room are shiny silver. They used to be wood years ago with a step-in. These are very considerate renovation projects, but there's others too where they've been a little more has been done and they still can be considered historic. So it's the idea that you can't change anything is not really accurate.
Thank you. Well,
this is one.
Let me just wrap up by saying I listened to what my colleague said, and I myself, I've been a real estate broker for 30 years. Okay, I'm also a big fan of historical places, and I'm not really interested in adding another layer of bureaucracy to our landowners downtown. But what I do happen to like about this is that basically, as a person who sat on Board of Adjustment and used to listen to people coming in here with this hardship or that hardship, the fact that you're actually going to provide a relief valve for all these property owners where they can now go to HPB and bypass going to Board of Adjustment and the Site Plan Review and Appearance Board, I think is really a great bonus. I think it was Ms. Patton that brought up, and I just wanted to ask city staff regarding the whole parking in lieu situation, okay? That's something where, personally, if you're the owner of a historic building and this building goes back to way back when, in my view, you absolutely need some consideration because, that's just a historic fact. There is very, very limited parking. That being said, if you're going to come in here and build Atlantic Crossing, you have to provide parking. Don't come and talk to me about parking in lieu. So I guess to me, having watched city staff probably closer than the average resident of this town the past 8 years, I've seen the city moving in this direction under multiple commissions and with the comprehensive plan. This was brought up how many times during the comprehensive plan discussions, okay? So the one thing I will just say, I agree with Ms. Blankenship 100%. This is a call for the commission. This is just a pit stop on the road for which the end of the road will be sometime in the next couple of months. But I'm happy to support this. I know the amount of time you guys put into this. I know that property owners, of course, don't want another layer of bureaucracy, and to your credit, I think that you really found a good way to balance it by saying, guess what, we're going to come up with a new process for you if you are in this area, where we're going to streamline it. You can go to people who are interested and knowledgeable about this and work out something that works for the city and historical preservation in these locations. So, I mean, listen, I hope the city commission gets behind it, but ultimately it's their call. So, with that being said, if someone wants to make a motion, let's
I'll make
move
a
it on
motion.
toward city commission.
Okay, I'll make a motion as soon as I can find it. No, that's fine. Recommend approval to the City Commission of ordinance number 26-23, amending section 4.5.1, local register of historic places of the land development regulations in the City of Delray Beach zoning map to reflect the historic designation of the Atlantic Avenue Historic District by finding that the amendment and the approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in land development regulations.
Second.
Let the record show, motion by Ms. Howell, second by Mr. Zeller. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
No.
Joy Howell,
Yes.
Gregory Snyder, Christina Morrison, Chris Brown absent, Chris Davy.
Yes. Let the record show the motion failed 3-1. Pass. No.
Motion carried, 3-1.
Carried.
It was a recommendation of approval, and there were 3 yeses.
Oh, okay. I thought we had 4 votes.
Oh, no,
In the affirmative.
it's just a majority here.
Just
You
a
have a
majority.
quorum, so.
Thank you very much. Exactly. Thank you. Ms. Hoyland, thank you very much. Ms. Giannotis, thank you.
Thank you for all your work on this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kelly. I appreciate it. Here I was
No
thinking,
problem at all.
I'm like, okay. Well, yeah, I was going to say, I'm like, City Commission's not getting it after all. Have a good night. Thank you all. Ms. Dassery,
Hi, good evening again.
something tells me this one's not going to take as long.
I think it should be pretty brief. So, agenda item 9B, we're entering into the record file number 2023-175. It's a request to name an alley in Osceola Park. So the map before you on your screens, it shows the length of the alley. It runs from Southeast 2nd Avenue to Southeast 8th Avenue between... Did I have that right? No, I have that wrong. I'm sorry. Southeast 2nd Street and Southeast 8th Street between 4th and 5th Avenue. So this is, the alley was created through 2 different plats. A portion of it was on the original Linton plat, and then the other 4 blocks of it were created through the Osceola Park plat in 1912. And this particular request is related to the development of some townhomes, the Centennial Square townhomes. The site plan was approved for these several years ago, and during the building permit review process, we discovered that the addressing is not as it should be. I'm sorry, go back a slide. There's the 3 townhomes here. They were addressed as 406, 408, and 410 Southeast 2nd Street. However, one of the units has the primary access onto the alley, and as we saw last month with the Kenmont Lane proposal, the alley has to be named in order to address the property to that. We are aware that we need to come up with policies moving forward to prohibit access from alleys, or if we are, that we would name the alleys with the plat. But for now, there's another one we have in our system that will likely come before you for a naming of an alley in order to make the addressing common sense for emergency responders. So then the westernmost property is going to be addressed to Southeast 4th Avenue. The middle one will stay 408 Southeast 2nd Street, and then the easternmost unit will be addressed to the alley if approved. And we're proposing the name Osceola Park Lane because the majority of the lane came by way of the Osceola Park plat. We do have a lot of policies in our comp plan about preserving alleys and the alleyway network. So this is an improved alley. It's been part of some of the Osceola Park improvements. And then we have your recommendations before, your options for board action before you, and I can answer any questions you may have.
Was the name Quillian Court considered? Just wondering.
I believe the city has come up with the direction that we don't name streets after people
that are alive.
That are alive, because we just did Camelot. We just did Camelot.
Fair enough.
That was the person.
Fair enough, Ms. Dassery. I'll turn to my colleagues. Does anybody have a question or a comment?
Happy to make a motion unless Mr. Zeller has a comment.
No, I think it has to be named, of course.
What's your suggestion, Mr. Zeller? What do you think? The Zeller was?
My suggestion
like
is
Quillian
that I
Court.
don't like designs where the alley is your access way.
Well, I know.
For these developments, but that's past and done with, so.
And we do, I mean, we define alleys as a secondary means of access, so they should not ideally have primary access from the alleys unless we undertake a big direction change. But for these few that we have that were approved with the access that way, we're trying to move them forward as best as we can in the safest fashion for the residents.
Let me say this, without passing judgment on the name, can we get a motion on this one?
I'll be happy to make a motion.
I have no objection to the name. It's a nice name.
I'm just having a little fun with the name, that's all.
It's just not a park, but it's a nice name.
Please.
Thank you. I recommend approval to City Commission of Resolution number 116-23 to designate the unnamed improved public alley right-of-way located south of Southeast 2nd Avenue and north of Southeast 8th Avenue, east of Southeast 4th Avenue, and west of Southeast 5th Avenue as Osceola Park Lane, finding that the request meets the applicable criteria in the land development regulations.
If I may, I have a typo. It should be between Southeast 2nd Street and Southeast 8th Street. So just
Okay, not Avenue.
that corrected to the motion.
As
Apologies
amended.
for that.
That's okay.
By Ms. Dassery. Second?
Yeah, second.
Second by Ms. Howell. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Joy Howell,
Yes.
Gregory Snyder, Christina Morrison, and Chris Brown absent. Chris Davy.
Yes. Let the record show that item passed 4-0. Great presentation, Ms. Dassery. Best of the evening.
Shorter the better.
Don't tell anybody I said that. So, what's on the agenda? What's coming up next
Okay.
besides case on?
Yes. So your next meetings are July 17th and August 21st. I know Dan would appreciate if you're going to be absent if you let her know that. And then just a brief update, the duplex setbacks and artificial turf amendments, which came before you recently, will be going to commission for second reading on July 18th, along with the landscape fee ordinance, which you saw several months ago. But those are all moving forward for approval at commission.
Great, great. Ms. Brandon?
I don't have any
Nothing?
comments. Thank you all.
Great. Are you going to be our permanent?
No,
No.
William's still with you.
Oh, okay. No. I didn't know if you guys were changing boards. or
No,
what have you.
he's just absent today.
You got it. Well, thank you both so much. Ms. Miller, thank
do
you.
have a
Mr.
question.
Zeller, please.
So today's a national holiday.
Correct.
Do we often meet on national holidays?
I know. I think the commission discussed it last meeting, that if the city doesn't observe it this year, then maybe next year.
Yeah. So, I was
do-
actually shocked that we were meeting today. It was actually funny because I went to do banking.
It's an important holiday.
Yeah.
And I do apologize on behalf of staff. I think it was an oversight with it being a new holiday, and we should not have scooted past that. So for next year, we will not meet on Juneteenth.
There we go. Thank you, Ms. Dassery. Ms. Brandon, thank you. Ms. Miller, Ms. Blankenship, Mr. Zeller, and Ms. Howell. Meeting is adjourned. Good night, all.
Thank you.